So this is CJ Baker, and this is episode 25 of the ongoing history of protest music, the companion podcast to the website, ongoinghistoryofprotestsongs.com. So today, my special guest is Christine Moad, bassist and vocalist of the Iowa-based band, Miss Christine. So thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So of course, we're doing this through Zoom, so we all social distancing.
Yes.
So how are you managing with the pandemic?
It's been an adjustment for sure. Normally, I'm touring like nonstop throughout the year, so it's pretty much halted all that. I think I've only played like 7 shows this year, which is really strange. I usually play like 100 shows, so it's been an adjustment for sure. How about you?
Yeah, we're doing fairly well. I was fortunate that I was already mostly working from home, so
That's
it wasn't
good.
as big of an adjustment.
Yeah.
And I tend to be a bit of an introvert anyway, so
Mm,
but obviously
yeah.
for a number of people, it's been pretty major.
Yeah, I feel like I got a crash course of what it's like to be an introvert.
Yeah.
Um, so I can't wait until we can get together and go to live shows and play live shows again. I miss live music so much.
Yeah. You been doing any live streaming or?
I did a live stream every week in the month of April, and since then I've done one every couple months. The next one I'm playing the I Voted Festival on
Okay.
November 3rd.
Okay.
So that'll be election day, and anyone who shows a photo of them with their absentee ballot, or if it's legal in your state to take a photo in front of your polling place, you send that, and that's how you get admission to the concert. And it's the biggest online festival of this year. And I'll be playing on the Iowa stage. So that's the next live stream I have coming up on election day.
Okay, so that's kind of a cool initiative there.
Yeah.
Good. And of course, the reason why you're mainly here is to talk about your music. So you recently, I guess it's going to be released by the time the podcast airs. So So the song Truth in Song.
Yes.
So what was the motivation behind that song?
Well, with everything going on in our country and being in our homes, I was an organizer on the Bernie 2020 campaign, and so I did a lot of door knocking and actual talking to people. And since everything had to become digital and all the protests after George Floyd was killed, I just decided that I didn't feel comfortable going out to big protests and being around people with the pandemic. And so all of my anger and frustration with what's going on and all of these things that are existential to us as human beings just kind of poured themselves into the song, and it felt really good to write it. I feel like it's a song that wrote itself kind of when I sat down at the piano, and just, since I can't be out there on the streets, I just needed to find a way to channel this energy, and that's what became Truth in Song.
Okay, cool. And also, like, even the title Truth in Song, like, to me, that title even highlights the role that music can play within social movements. So personally, why do you feel that's important to use your music to speak out on issues?
It's so important because music is so powerful, and it can reach different levels of humanity that might not otherwise work. Just having a conversation, or there's such a divide in our country right now, and being able to have a message through music that's so powerful, I think is really impactful. And I was so excited to find your blog and what you're doing, because it really, with the pandemic, and I recently had someone tell me to just stick to singing and not to don't talk politics.
Oh,
And
shut up and
then
sing.
yeah, and it was like, well, here you can listen to Truth in Song because I'll just tell you what I'm thinking in song if that's better for you. But just having the ability to know the history of how powerful music can be, and I think that there's a lot of people in power who try to get artists to not speak out because they know that, you know, music brings people together, and that if people come together, things will really start to change. So yeah.
Yeah, music definitely plays an important role in that. So you definitely speak out for your music, and you also mentioned you're involved with the Bernie Sanders campaign. So you're being politically active. Is that something you've always been, or is that something that come about later on in life?
It definitely came upon or later in my life. In 2012, I was at the second inauguration of Obama. I went to this presidential collegiate conference, and I got to meet people from all over the world and talk about their politics in their local community, which was really impactful. But for me, it wasn't until 2015 when I heard about Bernie Sanders in Iowa, back when nobody really knew who he was, and his message really impacted me. And 2020 was the year that I became way more politically active because I worked in Iowa and New Hampshire on the campaign, and that's very different work from being a musician. And then it just kind of naturally made its way into my music with Truth in Song. My first album, Conversion, has some political songs on it, but I think my next album will be a bit more political.
Yeah, because you even mentioned your album Conversion. Like, I know there's a couple of songs that definitely deal with different social issues, but I would say probably the most politically direct song, which I know you released the video for as well, is the Millennial Paradigm.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration behind that song?
So that was written shortly after the Democratic National Convention in 2016. I was there protesting, and I just saw and I felt in my bones that Trump would most likely win the 2016 election, just because people wanted so much change. And the only way that we can get that change is if we all come together and stop looking at social media and actually go out and have conversations with one another. And so my music video for that, I finished after I worked on the Bernie 2020 campaign. And so that was inspired from a lot of my experiences that I had just talking to people and hearing their stories.
Cool. And also, because even with the album, like, I even find like, obviously it's also the title song, even the title, the album title, Conversion, to me that's an interesting album title. What was the significance of that as an album title?
So that's an interesting question, because I chose that title for the album because that was my favorite song on the album. And the way that I recorded my album was nobody in my band had heard the songs. So we showed up in the studio and we did 3 songs a day for 5 days. And we would listen to the demo recording. I would hand out charts, and we would go into the studio and track every song on the spot. And the idea of that is that music is the most powerful when it's first created. And so because of that, I had no idea what my album was going to sound like going into the studio. It was a total gamble. And so I really liked how Conversion turned out, and that's why I named the album that. But just thinking about that more, and once a piece of art or an album is put out into the world, and we grow as people, the songs I'm writing now are very different than what that album is. I find it a very interesting title, and especially that song has to do with money and just realizing about, this pandemic has really opened our eyes, or at least my eyes, to capitalism and some of the failings with that. And so I think there is some other meanings in there as well.
Yeah, I think that's why, because I listened to the song, watched the video. It's probably my favorite track on the album too. Part of the reason why it's my favorite track is I couldn't quite figure out what it was about, but I could see a couple of different interpretations. Like I thought it might have been some kind of like self-identity thing connected to that, and then you now mention the monetary aspect, which makes sense as well. And
yeah, the music video, that is about gender identity. I'm genderqueer, and so that music video is how I feel trying to have to look a certain way, or the pressure of society. But that song, I wrote it when I lived in Nashville. I lived in Nashville for 3 years. And so there's a line in it that goes, they say it takes 3 weeks to form a habit. Well, what about 3 years?
Yeah.
And so I was really unhappy living in Nashville. So I moved back to Iowa to finish writing my album. And so that song was was written at a time when I was just feeling very sad about my current living situation and everything.
Yeah, because there seem to be a few songs in the album where it's almost like the personal and political intersects.
Yeah, definitely. It's all connected somehow.
Yeah. That definitely makes for a powerful listening experience. So we mentioned how fairly recently you got involved in politics, but with political music, was that something you're always drawn to?
I think so. And I don't think that I really knew that it was political. And the biggest thing that I learned from working on the campaign is that the political is personal, and it affects every single thing in our lives. And so to be able to share those messages in music, that is just so powerful. And yeah, thinking to certain like John Lennon songs or things like that I like to listen to, it's like, yes, those are very political, but I had no idea, or I didn't really think about it in that context. But yeah, it's definitely been a part of my life for sure.
Okay, cool. So what are some of your musical influences then? Like you mentioned John Lennon. Any other ones that kind of help shape your music?
Yeah, my favorite band is the Beatles. I love Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, Jefferson Airplane. I really like 60s and 70s rock. Some modern artists would be like Regina Spektor. When I was younger, I was really into Panic at the Disco. I also really love Motown music. The Supremes are one of my favorite groups. And I really love Ray Charles. So it's quite a mix, I guess.
That even shows up in your music, because sometimes when I introduce like artists and bands and stuff, I'll mention the genre that they are part of. I had a tough time figuring out what genre you're in, and I mean that as a compliment. You listen to that album, there is like rock elements, there's even a bit of punk elements, there's that R&B element. Like there's a number of different elements going on there.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a really hard time of putting it in a box as well, because there definitely are those elements. I also really love the band The Police. And my favorite bass player is Paul McCartney, and I love Sting. So
so that influenced your bass playing as well?
Yeah.
So as someone who has, because you even touched upon this a bit when you said that someone told you kind of to stick to music, but is that something, have you frequently faced backlash from using your platform to speak up?
Not so much until recently. And I think it just makes sense right now with how divided our country is. And speaking truth to power, it's very scary, and it still feels scary to me sometimes, speaking out against these things. And when I was performing live at the beginning of this year, I would say from the stage, ask people questions and to get them thinking about politics and stuff like that, because it really should be something that's on our everyday radar, because it affects all of us all over the world.
Yeah.
So I think it makes sense that I'm getting more backlash in the current times, but it's okay, because we need to speak out against these things and these awful atrocities that keep happening all over the world and in our own country.
So of course, I know a lot of like the purpose of like the song and the music is to encourage people to vote. But this is probably going to air after the election. So even like, for example, your new song, Truth in Song, that's not going to become irrelevant just because of who wins the election. So what do you think should take place regardless of who ends up winning the election?
What do I think should take place?
Yeah. What action do you think will still be needed in either scenario?
Yeah, in either scenario, we just need to bring people together to really speak up and fight these big corporations. And these lobbyists and these things have infiltrated our government, and we need to make sure that we elect people that represent our interests. And it's not over on November 3rd. It's, in my view, it's just the beginning. So we need to write our representatives, need to have peaceful protests, and just keep showing how important these things are. And for me, my biggest issue is Medicare for all. That's why I worked for the campaign, because as a self-employed musician, it's really freaky just knowing how to get healthcare, or how many of my friends have had to pay so much money for their healthcare costs. And that's something, if you look at the history of how long we've been trying to pass universal healthcare in our country, it's been going on for like over the past 70 years. So it's a long fight. Politics is not for the weak. It's a long, for sure.
So if my Medicaid, music, and that fight for universal health care, you got basically whatever administration wins, you don't have a candidate that's openly on board with it yet. So that work still need to be done.
Yeah, and if my music can help inspire people in any way to continue that fight, then that means the world to me, because if everyone has their own awakening to these issues, or to fight or get more politically active, and if my music can be a part of that, that'd be awesome. So I just felt so adamant that I needed to release this song, and I needed to get it out before the election. But like you said, it will still be relevant after the election, and fortunately or unfortunately, probably many years to come.
So the other thing you just mentioned there is the challenges in connection with musicians. And are you basically a full-time musician then, or do you have a second job as well?
Yeah, I'm a full-time musician. I teach private lessons. So through the pandemic, I've continued to teach, and I've been able to switch to Zoom lessons, which has been really nice. So that's what I do primarily when I'm not touring.
Good. What changes do you think could take place to support working musicians or trying to like make a living making music?
Well, a big one through all of this is going to be interesting to see how many venues survive. And a friend and I are working on musicians equity survey right now, where we're surveying musicians about what they want to see for live performance going forward, and try to potentially help work to get some legislation to make sure that musicians have more fair pay standards or things like that. But in terms of right now, what anyone can do is just support their favorite artist, whether that's tuning into a live stream or buying some merch directly from the artist. That's just really helpful.
Yeah, so those are practical ways to try to support directly.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned the initiative for like equity. I noticed there's a campaign even to try like with Spotify, the penny a play. That's
Mm-hmm.
something you're involved in too, or?
Yeah, we've been just talking to musicians all over the country and talking to some music lawyers about just Spotify and that whole business model, because there's the music industry is very unbalanced with
Yeah,
where the wealth is, and just, how do we fight companies like Spotify that aren't paying musicians fairly at all? And it seems really daunting, but someone's got to try to do it. So
yeah,
I'm glad to be working towards that in some way.
yeah. It's definitely an example of an industry, I guess, that has a history of being exploitive.
Yes.
Yeah, probably even more so in the digital age.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So before we conclude, is there anything else you want to say or plug?
Just that Truth in Song will be out by the time this podcast is up.
Yeah, and it'll be
And
posted on the website for then too.
awesome. And I'll be doing a pre-order campaign of sweatshirts and posters for the song that'll be coming up. You can find on my website, misschristinemusic.com.
Okay.
And that's a really helpful way to support me in this time since I can't tour. And yeah, there'll be snippets up from I Voted Festival on November 3rd. And
Okay.
depending on what time this airs, they will be replaying the concert on November 4th.
Okay.
So you can look up I Voted Festival and find out more information.
Okay, so a lot of good things to check out. And any other social media where people can find you, or?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Instagram if you look up Miss Christine Music. And then on Twitter, I'm Miss X Teen Music because my name's too long and wouldn't fit.
Okay, good. So I encourage definitely our listeners to check out your social media and more importantly, check out your music. If they're
Thank
able
you
to
so
support
much.
you through merch and other ways, that would definitely be good as well. So thanks again. I definitely enjoyed our discussion.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I really appreciate what you're doing so much.
Thanks, appreciate that. So that basically concludes the interview. I'll record a bit of a conclusion later on. It would be okay to feature your music through the podcast as well?
Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
so probably mostly snippets, but I'll probably play the entirety of your song at the end of the podcast.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Good, thanks. So I enjoyed our discussion. So this will probably air not this Monday, but the next Monday.
Okay,
Because I have another episode recorded for this Monday.
great. Awesome. Thank you so much. And
Yeah.
I really do appreciate everything you're doing. Your website is so helpful with just so much information.